So I'm Joanne Bichard, and I do have a PhD. And the title of my talk this evening is called Potty Mouth, because I'm going to talk about toilets. They're a bit dirty sometimes. There it is, that's my PhD. It was called Extending Architectural Affordance, the case of the publicly accessible toilet. And it took me 8 years to complete, part-time. Whilst I actually worked professionally doing lots of toilets research, which I'm going to talk about tonight. So you might be thinking, well, what's a publicly accessible toilet? What's the difference? What does she mean by that? So I thought I'd do a quick spidergram sort of thing about what it actually is. So you've got these publicly accessible toilets, and it's basically because the provision of toilets sort of falls into two sectors. We've got your public provision, which is your local authorities, which we all know as public toilets. And then you've got your private provision, and this is where your toilets are, your cafes and your pubs and your hotels, department stores, your train stations, bus stations, supermarkets, motorway services, fast food outlets, and anywhere you sort of go where you're out in the town, you suddenly think, oh God, I need to use the toilet, there is no toilets around, what am I going to do? And one of the things that I'm interested in my research is actually capturing those cognitive moments, those moments of thinking. Where do you go to go? That's me. In my various years, I've been doing this for over a decade now, so I've had a couple of hairstyles and I've actually gone very grey. But yeah, so I've been sort of looking at toilets all around the world and measuring them up and taking photographs. I'm not an architect or a designer, I'm actually a social anthropologist. But I do work with designers to sort of draw from them or tell them stories and information so that they know more of the subtleties of the culture of which they're doing their design in, because sometimes designers can be very functional and they'll miss out some beautiful subtleties which I'm hoping that I'm going to draw on this evening. This, for example, now if there had been a social anthropologist involved with this would never be allowed in our environment. So this is the famous train door lock. And there's a thing in design that says if you have to put a sign up to give instructions about how something works, the design has failed. So not only here are there instructions on how the thing works, but there's also a map. As well. I mean, this is not just one fail, this is like double fail. And how does this fail in so many ways? Well, it's a door lock. When you go into this space, this very private space of the toilet, and you're about to undress and do what you want to do in private, you want to shut the door. You don't want to have to read an instruction on how to shut the door. You just want to shut the door. So if you go in there and you're suddenly being amused by all of this, what happens if you don't speak English and you don't read English? What happens if you can't read? What happens if you're dyslexic and it just freaks you out? You know, this suddenly excludes a lot of people, and it suddenly can cause a lot of embarrassment for people who sometimes, need to use the toilet and, suddenly get caught out if they don't lock the door properly. So obviously if I work in toilets, I deal with two bits of the body's function. I deal with the bladder and the bowel and how those work for people. And lots of people have lots of medical conditions in which they have problems with their bladders and bowels. They can't hold. There's a basic thing we say is that as you get older, not only do you start losing your ears and your eyes and hearing and sight and everything, but your bladder gets weaker, and it means that you can't hold urine as long and you need to release it quicker. So basically you need to use the toilet more and you can't actually get as much time to get to the toilet. So we actually do need lots of toilets for people when they're out in the built environment. Now this is a particular problem for women, because for women they go through numerous life events such as childbirth and menstrual cycle, and all of these events and biological happenings actually affect the bladder and the bowel. And so there's a study, most of what we know about bowel health, for example, has been taken from studies on soldiers. So there's very regimented sort of, everybody goes once a day. But when they actually studied women, and they only just recently did this at the turn of the millennium, when they actually studied women's bowel health, they found that women sometimes go to the loo once a day, sometimes they go 3 times a day, sometimes they go once every 3 days. And there's not a normal baseline for women. So this sort of means that sometimes a woman might not need a toilet when they're out for the day, but then other days, other times of the month, they might need to visit the toilet 3 times a day. So one fascinating thing about toilets, especially for me, is that it's one of the last places of public space that is divided by gender. And this is quite interesting within the design of the facilities. So obviously you've got the ladies and the gents, and the space, in the names of equality, tends to be divided 50-50. So you've got, here's the ladies, and here's the gents. Fine. Here we've got the ladies, you've got your 3 cubicles here, and you've got your 3 cubicles in the gents here, and you've got your wash basins here. But what you've also got here is urinals. So effectively, men's provision has doubled. Okay, fine, what have you, but the fact is that women take twice as long to go to the toilet because we have more clothes to deal with. We need more private space. So effectively, that's one of the reasons, because we have half the provision and take double the time. That's one of the reasons that we often spend a lot of time queuing. It's not because we're nattering, it's because we actually don't have enough toilets to provide us for our needs. Most of my work's been done with people with disabilities, and this is my field site. It's a very small field site, and this is the standard accessible toilet that everybody sees. And what kind of input could a social anthropologist give to the design of this? Well, one of the key things that happens in this particular facility that I often find is that the toilet flush here is always, or nearly always, quite often on the wrong side. The toilet flush in the design of this facility should be there. And that's because if you use a wheelchair and you've transferred onto the toilet here, to flush the toilet, you usually transfer back to your wheelchair and reach up, if you can, and flush the toilet. If you've got the flush over there, you won't be able to flush. And I've actually spoken to lots of people who've been terribly embarrassed that they've not been able to do what's very natural in what all feels very proper in a toilet, to flush away your waste, and they haven't been able to reach it. And one of the reasons, and we don't know if it's an urban myth or not, and we don't think anybody's going to give us the money to find it out, but what's interesting about, why does the flush always go on the right hand side when it really should be on the left hand side? And one of the urban myths about this is that it's because men are plumbers and they always put the flush handle on the right because the majority of them are right-handed. So there's just this act of their own experience in transferring into how they fit the toilet. I don't know if that's true, and I don't know if anybody will give me money to find out if it's true. So basically, we have 4 designs of cubicles that are out there in the built environment for us to use. And you've got your standard cubicle here, you've got the unisex cubicle, which is the last slide, you've got this peninsula compartment that's slightly bigger, and then you've got the PAMIS adult changing bench at the top. I'll talk about those at the end. So that's what we have. This is our population pyramid of all of our sort of abilities. But the reality is we're all trying to get into these 2 cubicles. That's the reality of our provision. And sometimes this causes great tension between user groups and about who has legitimate access to certain cubicles. And what we often find with many toilets, especially in public realm, public local authority toilets, is that they're now closed. Pressure on government, on local authority budgets. Somehow, the fact that we do have toilets in the built environment in lots of businesses and everything means that there is a lot of provision now. It's not the Victorian era. They're not toilets that serve communities. They are everywhere. But they still serve an important function, I feel. So I'm so passionate about toilets, I created with my research partner the Great British Public Toilet Map. We did research. We went to every local authority in the country, demanded through the Freedom of Information Act information of their toilets. They gave it to us. We mapped it using OpenStreetMap, and we've created the largest database of public toilets in the UK. It's 10,000 of publicly accessible toilets, because we also have train toilets and supermarkets and department stores who are willing to give us their information. We are really hoping that we can get it into an act very, very soon. Very, very soon. Hopefully. We wanted it for World Toilet Day this year, but don't think that's going to happen. So maybe by the beginning of next year. So, gents. Well, let me tell you about what I know a little bit about gents' toilets. They've had a lot of innovation in design. Gentlemen really do get some of the innovation. This is the Urilift. it comes up at dusk, it goes down at dawn, and it provides, you know, sanctuary for urination, especially for, you know, in the evening. Now, in my research, you know, there are certain groups of men who won't use this. Men with disabilities can't use it. Men who serve purity, no, that's the wrong term, sorry, hygiene observations due to religions, they won't use this because there's no hand washing facilities or anything. Men who have shy bladder syndrome can't use this. So all of a sudden, there's lots of men, older men won't use it. So all of a sudden, there's a lot of men who it's been built for suddenly excluded from this design, and we begin to see that actually this has been made for men of a certain age after a certain amount of alcohol. It's very, very expensive. This is a very, very specific design feature just to counter alcohol consumption. And I question whether this is good use of, you know, often built by by local authorities, if it's good use of public money. There's been temporary and other designs out there, so they really, really thought about this. This was a really big issue. When I worked with Westminster Council, they'd been pressured to put one of this one, I think, up next to the National Gallery, because there was what was known as little hidey corners in the National Gallery. There was lots of urination going there, and it was actually eating into the stone of the National Gallery. Uric acids are not nice. This is a more sustainable option I found recently, which is just a bale of hay that you can pee in and everything. That could possibly work. Some pretty flowers to pee in. You know, people really do go to town. Some of the designs on urinals, really, really lovely. Maybe, I don't know. I think the person who has to clean that particular facility probably really hates that one. This one I found when I accidentally walked into the wrong toilet, because it does happen in my business sometimes. I end up going into the wrong toilet, and what a pleasant surprise I got. I do love the mirrors, all angles, you can see everything. Now this one's quite an interesting one. This was developed by Virgin Airlines, and they were going to, I don't know where they were going to put it, but they had developed it. And then lots of women said, no, we're not having that, no. So they actually pulled it from production. Thankfully, I was at a museum recently where they were showing all this wonderful stuff. And somebody had a wonderful sense of humour of how to display this in a museum. This is Spuck. This was developed by the Germans, and it sits on the underside of the toilet seat. And what it does is, if you lift the toilet seat, it screams at you in German to put the toilet seat down. And it was developed in Germany to encourage men to sit down to urinate, because it actually is healthy for male bladders to actually be seated. The sort of biomechanical thing of pressing on the bladder, like it does for us women. Women, your urethra should be lower than your knees when you wee. I mean, that's why squatting is so good for you. But yeah, so this was developed in Germany to scream at you if you lifted the toilet seat. And apparently, I've heard that in Germany now there are no urinals in the men's toilets. There's just toilet stalls. And this says 12% of British men spend time eating in the washroom. Please don't do that. It's really not nice. Please. Find something else to do there. Anyway, ladies, what happens for us? Well, we have always been encumbered with clothes. We don't have the biology for public urination, so we've always had to get through layers. In many years ago, obviously, previous centuries, it was layers of petticoats and skirts and everything. And now it's basically trousers and jeans, because we are basically walking around in men's clothes. They got uroliths, we got a cardboard thing to try and fit into us and give us like almost an artificial penis so that we can sort of stand up and pee. That's as far as the innovation went for us. But this is an Indian urine funnel for women. I mean, there's something about it that, for me, both grotesque and slightly beautiful about this. I mean, it's ceramic and everything, but it almost looks like this weird claw. So I don't know if I would ever be able to use something like that, but I did find that really, really interesting, and how, this is a global issue that women have to deal with. And of course, we often have to deal with our cubicles. We don't get pretty flowers or anything like that. We get a toilet and we get a sand bin, a sanitary bin, which is often stuck in a very small cubicle right up next to the toilet. We have to negotiate, we have to put our legs on it, we have to wheel ourselves around it, or, you know, and it's a pretty uncomfortable situation to be in when you have to use these cubicles. And sometimes we get more than one sand bin. Sometimes we get loads. And you go, oh, what's going on here? But what we often find is that we are losing a lot of public toilet provision within our built environment. And some toilets are just being made for certain groups of people. And this can be quite problematic. Just as I was finishing my PhD, which predominantly focused on the experiences of people with disabilities, I was standing at St Leonard's Warriors Gate train station, and they have this sign up, and a woman asked to use the toilet, and she had 2 children, 2 toddlers, and she asked to use the toilet, and they flatly refused to let her use this toilet because she wasn't disabled. And I thought, well, here we go, we're in a really interesting situation now, where toilet provision is only provided to certain groups of people within public space. And I found this even more interesting in York, where they had built this wonderful changing places toilet, which is the Palace toilet I mentioned in one of the earlier slides, the biggest cubicle. It actually has a bed in it with a hoist and everything, and it's a wonderful, wonderful design. But I was particularly taken with this sign, in that, you know, here we have this sign with, you know, the wonderful changing places. But what does this actually mean? Like, tough luck for the rest of you? I'm still very, very curious as what they're trying to get across by that sign there. I'm going to have to investigate next time I'm in York. And of course, we now have other issues that we are facing. I mean, it's become a very big thing in America about gender identity and who has access to toilets. And I know a lot of my fellow researchers, you know, they really are stringent that, you know, a woman's toilet is a place for a woman. And it's just like, it's becoming quite politicised, that our world's getting quite you know, robust at the moment and everything. So yes, so these are other issues that we're actually thinking about and trying to sort of encounter and discuss. Because actually, the reality, whilst from an academic point of view, we can say, well, you know, everybody should have access and everything like that. The reality is that, you know, most people appreciate separate provision at the moment, and they want to, when they enter the provision, not only women, but men as well, they want to enter their gender-specific provision. But we are facing, as I say, a big problem with the lack of toilets, because it's one thing to have toilets in the private sector, but what that actually means is that a lot of toilets for people are restricted by access. So a lot of homeless people are denied access to those toilets. A lot of people who might feel uncomfortable going to certain venues because they sell alcohol or for whatever reason, they sell meat. They might not want to enter those venues to use the toilet facilities. So suddenly their world of access to toilets becomes much smaller, and that can cause people a lot of problems. Anyway, that's pretty much it. I really could bore for England on this. But if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask, and thank you very much for listening.
Fabulous, that was brilliant. Thank you so much, Joanne. That was wonderful. Just when is World Toilet Day? Because
November the 19th.
November the 19th.
No,
so it's coming up.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So it's in 2 weeks.
It's in 2 weeks. It's on a Sunday though this year, so I don't know if it'll make the news as much as it does.
Fabulous. Well, I never knew. Who knew?
Yes, World Toilet WTO. I belong to the WTO, the World Toilet Organisation. These professional bodies.
Just after the WHO. Well, that's fantastic. And there are 2 toilets out here.
Yeah, and I can highly recommend the ladies. I was very impressed with the cubicle size of the ladies. Very nice, very nice.
Not that I know, of course. No, that was brilliant. I've got loads of questions. Anybody want to kick start with? Yes, here.
It's not just when you World Toilet Day, but what's it for?
To raise awareness on toilet issues, mostly for countries that don't have access to toilets. So you've got a situation in India, which is always one of the prime ones used. There's more mud on farms than there are toilets. They've got a big problem with women with open urination, open defecation, and then attacks, and it's a really, really big issue. So they're trying to raise awareness. I think it's something like 3 billion people don't have access to a toilet. You know, it is very much a sort of Western luxury in some ways. You know, it's quite areas of, you know, whole swathes of Africa don't have toilet sanitation. It's been one of the biggest problems in actually developing some areas of the world.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah. I was just looking for a comment really about open air urinals. I think I've never seen an open air urinal in the UK. There's obviously some from this side.
Yeah.
But I remember visiting Rotterdam, and there was urinals. I mean, it doesn't help the ladies, I know, but my perception is Europe are a bit more forward-thinking about that. Have you got a comment on that?
Well, I personally think it's a hangover from the Victorian era, where sort of space, the city space, was designed for men, by men, for men. And the first kind of public toilets appeared in department stores. So our provision has always been sort of privatised and in the commercial sector, so to speak. You know, women did the shopping sort of thing. So it's very gender specific. So when these in the UK, these urinals started popping up everywhere, I was quite interested in the men that they didn't serve, but also how do we actually start reading the space of this? You know, if I'm out with my husband, you know, there's a urinal there, he gets to go, I don't. What does that say about how I'm welcome, how the city is meeting my needs? Especially, as I say, you know, I would need to use the toilet more often than him maybe, or, you know, especially during the day and everything. They're not there during the day, they're just serving for the evening economy. I'm not seeing them as much anymore. I think this was a particular thing that happened at a particular period in the early 2000s, 2000s, and turn of the millennium. I think that's the phrase, isn't it? And they kind of dwindled down because people are beginning to realise it's gender provision.
Do you not think though that a lot of those men, if they weren't there, they would go anyway? So it's kind of solving a problem as opposed to.
Well, this is yes, and it does, and local authorities spend a hell of a lot of money in street cleaning, and it does cause a lot of problems for people. And so, for that kind of money, for that kind of innovation, why not just build a standard toilet block? You know, there has been innovations. I mean, they've done some similar things again in Holland. They've done some. Sort of made a female equivalent sort of little thing. They're not particularly pleasant. I mean, if you're young and you need to go, it's fine.
I think that's the target market though, isn't it?
It is. But then, what does that say about our cities and our towns when we won't cater to older people who also need to go? So, you know, I'm waiting for the bus to, you know, get home. I need to go to the loo. I've had a few drinks. I need to go to the loo. I went when I left. Need to go to the loo, there's nothing out there. A lot of people decide not to go out. It suddenly becomes a really big focus point on their life, and their world suddenly starts shrinking.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And the whole gender identity issue is also interesting in terms of, on the continent, sometimes you'll see, I think I'm right, it's both genders use the facilities, and that kind of, given that we're now sort of thinking maybe there aren't just two male and female, maybe it's a bit of a spectrum, in which case maybe we should just all get on with it.
Yeah. But again, it's causing a lot of problems. I noticed on one of the discussion boards I'm involved in, people have noticed that the unisex accessible facilities are being made the gender neutral facilities, and so the disabled lobby are getting upset that, you know, more people are using those particular toilets, and it's a minefield. Yeah, it's fantastic.
So you scratch the surface. Yes.
In urban ground, they've got 3 coffee shops in Eastbourne now, and it's just one big toilet for male, female, and disabled. So and they just cater for everybody.
Yeah.
Is that the new one on South Street? Is that?
Was it South Street? And there's one near the Nationwide Building Society, one in the town at Art Gallery.
Yeah, you're right. And that's all. Yeah.
Oh, I'll have to come and do a study of that.
Big,
coffee's good.
It's for everybody.
Yeah.
And it's good coffee as well.
Yeah.
There we go.
Have to come and look at that. That'd be great.
Go and check out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so any last questions? I'm sure we, that's probably, well, Joanna's going to be around for a bit anyway, I think, I
Yeah.
hope. So can we just thank Joanna again for
Yeah.
Thank